Have you ever wondered why the woman who seems untouched by the clamor of men's attention becomes the one they cannot stop circling? Why the woman who chooses her own solitude, not as a prison but as a sanctuary, exerts a gravitational pull stronger than the one who bends herself to be wanted? In Jungian terms, she is an archetype of withdrawal and wholeness, a woman who has claimed her shadow, who no longer begs for the validation of the collective masculine gaze. And it is precisely because she does not seek it that men feel compelled to offer it. The modern world often tells women to chase visibility, to remain ever available, ever desirable, ever radiant for someone else's eyes. But the woman who dares to step away, who no longer contorts herself to the rhythm of demand, embodies a paradox. She is untouchable, and because she is untouchable, she is pursued. Men find themselves restless before her, not because she courts their affection, but because she reveals something rare, the sovereign energy of a self-contained soul. In the unconscious of men lies a deep split, the craving for conquest and the terror of rejection. Jung knew that within every man is an anima, a feminine figure, both muse and destroyer, healer and threat. When a woman chooses solitude, she steps into that archetype fully. She ceases to mirror his ego back to him. She denies him the easy gratification of being her son. Instead, she becomes the moon, cool, distant, cyclical, always shining, yet never asking. This absence of need strikes him harder than any desperate attempt at closeness. For the male psyche, it awakens both his shadow and his longing. She becomes the forbidden fruit, the mystery he must solve, the puzzle his ego cannot leave unfinished. Solitude in her case is not loneliness, but sacred ground. She is like the Stoic philosophers who reminded us that one must first govern oneself before attempting to govern the world. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free," and the woman in solitude embodies this truth. She is brave enough to face silence, to confront her inner chaos, to stand unflinching in her own company. In a society that worships noise, her refusal to seek distraction is radical. Men look upon her and sense that she has touched something eternal, something they crave but cannot name. Do you see what happens here? The more she withdraws into herself, the more he projects onto her. His fantasies, his desires, his fears, they begin to wrap around her image like ivy around stone. He mistakes her independence for rejection, and rejection for value. In his unconscious, what is withheld is what is most worthy. And so her silence, her refusal to chase, becomes the language of obsession. Yet the power she holds is not calculated manipulation. It is not the cold game of withholding for attention. No, it is deeper, more elemental. It is the power of individuation, the process Jung described as becoming whole unto oneself. A woman who chooses solitude has begun that process. She integrates her light and her shadow, her tenderness and her ferocity. She ceases to fracture herself to fit another's expectation. In doing so, she radiates authenticity, and authenticity is magnetic. Men feel it in ways they cannot explain. They sense that she does not tremble at the prospect of abandonment, because she has already sat in the chambers of her own aloneness and emerged intact. She does not collapse into despair if she is overlooked, because she has already crowned herself in private ceremony. This immunity to external validation is intoxicating, because it reveals a strength that most men have never mastered within themselves. He begins to orbit her not because she beckons, but because her indifference threatens his ego. To him, she becomes the mirror of his inadequacy, the silent proof that his approval is no currency in her world. And yet, paradoxically, this very lack of hunger awakens his deepest hunger. It is the wound of the male unconscious, that he chases most ferociously what does not bow to him. She embodies the anima he cannot control, and so she becomes unforgettable. The woman who embraces solitude does not wait by the door. She builds temples within herself, and those temples glow so brightly that others wish to enter. But she holds the keys, and the keys are never given cheaply. Her presence whispers of choice, of standards, of boundaries forged in silence. And because she stands alone, She stands taller than all the others, bending to be chosen. Her solitude is not absence, but presence intensified. And in that presence lies the seed of obsession, the paradox that the one who does not seek is the one most sought. Her solitude is not a void but a mirror. In her quiet refusal to orbit around men, she forces them to face themselves. A man who encounters such a woman stands before a psychological riddle. Why does she not bend to him? Why does his usual charm fall silent against her stillness? In Jungian language, she is not merely an individual, but an archetypal force, awakening in him the confrontation with his own anima, the inner feminine he has avoided, repressed, or denied. The man accustomed to being needed is unsettled by her independence. He is accustomed to women who mold themselves into reflection pools, who echo back his worth, who soothe his insecurities with compliance. But she is a mountain, not a mirror. She does not bend to please, and in her silence, he hears the faint cracks of his own ego. The truth is this: when a woman claims solitude, she withdraws from the great game of projection. She no longer plays the role of his mother, his savior, his admirer. She becomes herself, unmasked, indivisible, and therefore she becomes in his psyche a terrifying and irresistible figure. The irony is sharp. Men often claim they want a woman who adores them, who gives her all, who melts into their arms. Yet over time, the unconscious grows restless in such comfort. What the male psyche secretly craves is friction, polarity, the challenge of the untamed. And so when she refuses to orbit him, he cannot resist the gravity of her orbit. Like Icarus before the sun, he draws closer, knowing he could burn, but unable to stay away. Solitude, in this context, is a form of power, because it is a reclamation of wholeness. Jung wrote of individuation as the journey of integrating the unconscious with the conscious, of reconciling one's shadow with one's light. Most women are conditioned to seek completion in men, to let him be the missing half, but the solitary woman seeks her missing pieces within. She enters the cavern of her own psyche, faces the hidden figures of her shadow, wrestles her demons, and emerges sovereign. This sovereignty terrifies and magnetizes men alike, because it is rare. It is untamed energy clothed in grace. You may not realize how deep this power runs until you step into it yourself. When you sit with your solitude long enough, you begin to hear the echoes of your own soul. The noise of external validation fades, and you discover that your worth is not up for auction. This kind of presence cannot be faked. It seeps through your voice, your gaze, your choices, and men, though they may not understand it consciously, feel it instinctively. They sense they are in the presence of someone who will not be swayed by shallow offerings. Think of the Stoic Marcus Aurelius, who reminded himself daily that the opinions of others are fleeting smoke, unable to touch the core of the self. The solitary woman lives by this truth. She does not crumble under criticism, nor bloom only under praise. Her roots are in herself. And like the tree that grows unbothered by storms, she draws life from within. This resilience is rare, and rarity awakens pursuit. There is also the matter of mystery. Men are often intoxicated, not by what is revealed, but by what is withheld. The solitary woman, not by manipulation, but by essence, embodies this mystery. She is not transparent in her availability, not predictable in her responses. She holds secrets because she has depths, and those depths make him restless. His psyche projects onto her idealization, fantasies, fears. In truth, he does not even see her fully. He sees the projection of his anima reflected in her quiet distance. But that projection fuels his desire, because she becomes more than a woman. She becomes a symbol of his own unfinished inner work. Do you see how this unfolds? Her solitude awakens him, not because she intends it, but because she embodies what he lacks. She is not conquered, and the male unconscious has always been obsessed with the unconquerable. This is the eternal story, the knight chasing the goddess who will not bow, the poet yearning for the muse who will not stay, the man haunted by the woman who refuses his kingdom. And though he may never fully possess her, the attempt reshapes him. For the woman who chooses solitude, this is not about power over him, but power within herself. It is about stepping outside the economy of attention, about refusing to trade authenticity for approval. And in that refusal, she steps into something larger than romance. She steps into destiny. She is no longer the dependent figure seeking shelter in another's arms. She is the sovereign figure who carries her own flame into the night. And so he is drawn, irresistibly, not because she courts him, but because she has become the one thing he cannot command: freedom. Freedom has a fragrance that lingers long after the woman has left the room. It is not the perfume she wears, but the atmosphere she creates, a quiet certainty, a self-contained radiance. The man feels it like a pulse in the air. She does not need him. And because she does not need, her presence carries the weight of choice. This is what unsettles him. Most of his life, he has been met with women who bend, who accommodate, who adjust their rhythms to his. But when he meets the woman of solitude, he confronts the dissonance of being unnecessary. And paradoxically, it makes him crave her necessity. CarlJung would say this is the anima demanding recognition. Her independence ignites the forgotten feminine within him. She does not play into his ego's script, so his soul projects meaning onto her. She becomes a symbol, a mirror of the unlived parts of himself. He wants to capture her, because capturing her feels like reclaiming something buried in his own unconscious. And yet, she is not his to capture. She belongs to herself, and in this sovereignty, she becomes an archetype of what men secretly revere and fear: the woman beyond possession. It is important to see how her solitude is not loneliness. Loneliness is hunger for what is absent. Solitude is fullness in what is present. She does not sit in the silence as a victim of abandonment, but as a student of her own depths. She confronts the places within her that once ached for validation, for the hand that would save her, for the voice that would assure her. And she becomes the voice, the hand, the savior. This is shadow work at its purest, the alchemy of turning wounds into wisdom, dependency into strength. You may not realize how few ever dare to walk this path. To sit in solitude without distraction is to face the raw fragments of the psyche: shame, grief, anger, longing. Most run from it, drowning themselves in relationships, in noise, in endless pursuit of attention. But she does not run. She stays. And because she stays, she transforms. This transformation cannot be imitated. It is earned in the fire of inner confrontation. When you embody it, men feel it, even if you say nothing. Think of Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who taught that true freedom is found not in controlling others, but in mastering oneself. The solitary woman lives this truth. She is not moved by whether he arrives or whether he leaves. She does not bind her worth to the rise and fall of his attention, and in that detachment, she becomes strangely magnetic, for the human psyche is drawn to what cannot be easily owned. He feels himself bending toward her precisely because she will not bend toward him. There is a primal energy here that unsettles him. Deep in his unconscious, he carries myths of conquest: the hunter, the warrior, the ruler. Yet when faced with her, he encounters a force that does not yield to conquest. She is not prey, not territory, not an ornament for his ego. She is a sovereign land, already claimed by herself. To approach her is to approach the unknown, and in that mystery, he is undone. You can feel the irony. She has no interest in manipulating him, yet her lack of interest sharpens his fascination. She does not rehearse ways to attract, but her refusal to perform is itself attraction. Because in a world saturated with women trying to be chosen, she is the one who chooses herself. And this, to him, feels like scarcity, the rare jewel he cannot buy, the star beyond reach, the truth that eludes his grasp. But the heart of her power is not in what he feels for her. It is in what she has claimed for herself. She has walked away from the endless cycle of proving, pleasing, and performing. She has seen the futility of building her identity from a man's gaze, and in turning inward, she discovers something eternal. that her worth was never in question, that it was only ever hidden beneath the noise of expectation. Men will orbit her because of this, but she does not revolve around their orbits. She walks her path, and whether they join her or not, her steps do not falter. For her, solitude is not isolation, but alignment. It is the path of individuation, the journey toward becoming whole, unshaken by the tides of validation, untouched by the hunger for constant reassurance. And so, while he wonders why he cannot resist her, the deeper truth emerges. She does not live for resistance or desire. She lives for truth, and truth, when embodied, has always been irresistible. There comes a moment in every man as silent reflection when he realizes why she unsettles him so deeply. It is not her beauty, though beauty she has. It is not her mystery, though mystery clings to her like night to the stars. It is her refusal to collapse into the role his unconscious scripts demand. She does not play the maiden awaiting rescue, nor the lover desperate for his validation, nor the companion who exists only to soften the edges of his solitude. She is solitude itself, embodied, alive, radiant. And in her, he sees both his longing and his inadequacy reflected back at him. Carl Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This woman has claimed that privilege, and in doing so, she disturbs those who have not. For most men, identity is still entangled in conquest, in proving, in being seen as significant through the eyes of others. But when he stands before her, he faces a mirror that refuses to flatter. Her independence reveals the parts of him still chained to approval, still enslaved to external validation. And rather than diminishing him, this confrontation pulls him toward her like gravity, the gravity of wholeness he has yet to achieve. Her silence carries weight because it is not empty. When she withholds words, she is not punishing him, but preserving herself. She does not bleed her energy into proving her worthiness of attention. She sits, she breathes, she waits, not for him, but for her own clarity. This unnerves him. Most women, he thinks, would rush to fill the silence, to soothe the discomfort. But she does not rescue him from his own unease, and in not rescuing him, she forces him to confront what lies beneath his need for her approval. It is shadow work in action, though he does not name it so. He feels both attraction and resentment. Attraction to her centeredness, resentment that she will not dissolve into the pattern he expects. But this is why he cannot let go. She awakens the archetype of the divine feminine, not the submissive, ornamental feminine, but the untamed, sovereign feminine who dwells beyond the grasp of control. To resist her would be to resist a part of his own psyche, calling him toward growth. You too may know this power if you choose it. The power is not in rejection for its own sake, nor in coldness disguised as strength. It is in the willingness to be whole without a partner, to embody completeness rather than chase it through another. Most people fear this level of self-possession, for it means releasing the fantasy that someone else will make them enough. But if you dare to release it, you step into the same gravity she holds. Seneca once wrote, "He who is brave is free." The solitary woman lives this truth with every breath. She is brave enough to face the evenings alone without reaching for the comfort of a man's voice. Brave enough to feel desire and not collapse into dependency. Brave enough to lose what others would cling to and still not lose herself. This bravery ripens into freedom, and freedom is the fragrance that intoxicates him. He cannot resist it because he does not have it. He senses in her a liberation that eludes him, and so he circles closer, as though by proximity he might absorb it. But here lies the paradox. The closer he comes, the more he realizes she cannot be possessed. And the more he realizes this, the deeper his desire becomes. It is not lust alone. It is hunger for the self he glimpses through her presence. She is not trying to seduce, yet her existence seduces. Not because she bends toward him, but because she stands firmly within herself. Her life is not a rejection of men, though it may appear so. It is the reclamation of herself. And in reclaiming herself, she creates a standard no man can diminish. To walk beside her, he must rise, not in dominance, but in depth, not in control, but in consciousness. For she will not abandon her solitude to soothe his insecurity. She will not trade her hard-earned freedom for the fragile comfort of being chosen. She chooses. And in that choice lies the deepest truth. She is not resisting him. She is embodying herself. And it is precisely this embodiment that makes resistance impossible for him. The more he studies her, the more he realizes that her solitude is not a void, but a kingdom. She has built an interior world so rich, so alive, that to enter it feels like trespassing into sacred ground. Most men mistake solitude for loneliness, believing it to be a deficit that must be filled. But in her, solitude is not emptiness. It is fullness. It is where she communes with her own soul, where she strengthens the muscles of her mind, where she sits in dialogue with eternity. Jung called this the path of individuation, the process by which a human being integrates the fragments of the psyche into a unified whole. She has walked further on this path than most, perhaps because she has learned to tolerate what others cannot. The silence where truth speaks, the stillness where wounds surface, the shadows where unhealed patterns dwell. While others run from their shadows, she turns to face them. In doing so, she dissolves the compulsions that drive so many women into dependency. The need to be needed, the hunger to be validated, the desperation to be chosen. This is why men find her so disarming. For centuries, men have carried the unconscious expectation that women will exist as mirrors of their ego. A woman who places him at the center soothes his insecurities, but a woman who does not need him unsettles him because she refuses to carry the weight of his incomplete self. She is not his balm, not his proof, not his savior. She is herself, whole and radiant, with or without him. And so, paradoxically, she becomes irresistible. When he looks at her, he senses that she will not beg for his presence. She will not collapse into despair if he walks away. She will not mold herself to fit the shape of his desire. And because of this, her value in his eyes multiplies. He feels that to win her is to win something rare, something beyond the reach of ordinary conquest. Yet she is not a prize. She is not a conquest. She is a sovereign soul. And any man who hopes to stand beside her must be willing to confront his own shadows first. You may have noticed this dynamic in your own life. Perhaps you felt the pull of men who dismissed you when you chased them, yet could not leave you alone when you pulled back into yourself. That is not coincidence. It is psychology. The more you cling, the more you feed their ego without challenging it. The more you stand in your solitude, the more you awaken their shadow. They cannot resist what does not flatter them because it forces them into growth. And though many will resent it, the ones capable of true depth will rise to meet it. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." The solitary woman lives this. Her happiness does not hinge upon a man's attention, nor does her peace tremble at the threat of abandonment. She has cultivated thoughts rooted in self-respect, in presence, in resilience. And because she governs her inner life, no man can rule her. And yet, here lies the paradox once again. She is more magnetic than any woman who chases. Why? Because she is free. And freedom is the one thing every man secretly longs for, yet fears. He sees in her the life unchained, the soul unpossessed, the fire that burns without permission. He both desires and dreads it, for to approach her means confronting his own bondage. This is not the solitude of bitterness. It is not the isolation of fear. It is the solitude of strength, of sovereignty, of integration. And this solitude teaches her to see men clearly. She no longer confuses attention with affection, desire with devotion, control with love. She knows the difference, because her solitude has taught her what wholeness feels like. She does not mistake half offers for love, because she has already known fullness within herself. For him, this is maddening. He cannot seduce her with empty promises. He cannot bind her with fear of loss. He cannot trap her with the illusion of dependence. The levers of control that worked on others fail against her, and the more they fail, the more his fascination grows. In truth, it is not that she chooses solitude over men, it is that she chooses herself, again and again. And in choosing herself, she awakens him to the part of himself he has yet to claim. That is why he cannot resist her. She is not his missing half. She is his mirror. The mirror of what he could become if he dared to stand alone. And so her story circles toward its conclusion, not in the grand gestures of romance, but in the quiet triumph of becoming whole. She has walked the valley of shadows, wrestled with the ghosts of abandonment, and emerged with something men cannot grant and cannot take away, a self that stands untouchable. She is no longer the maiden waiting to be chosen, nor the lover desperate to be kept. She is the queen of her own inner kingdom, sovereign in silence, radiant in solitude. This does not mean she closes her heart. On the contrary, her heart is vast, but it is no longer for sale. Love, when it comes, will be an offering, not a transaction. She has stripped away the illusions that once bound her to suffering, that worth is proven in his gaze, that happiness is tethered to his return, that she must shrink herself to be loved. In their place, she has planted deeper truths, that love without freedom is not love at all, that presence is sweeter than possession, and that no man can add to a woman who already knows her own fullness. He senses this, even if he cannot name it. He feels it in the way she listens, not to flatter, but to understand. In the way she stands, unhurried, untouched by the frenzy of needing to be noticed. In the way her eyes do not plead, but pierce, as if they see beyond the masks he wears. Her solitude has trained her to see what is real, and men, accustomed to hiding behind power and performance, are startled by her clarity. She cannot be fooled, and she cannot be bought. Jung spoke of anima and animus, the unconscious feminine within the man, the unconscious masculine within the woman. When she chooses solitude, she is not rejecting men, she is integrating the masculine within herself. She no longer seeks protection outside because she has cultivated strength within. She no longer seeks direction from others because she has learned to navigate her own depths. This union inside her makes her whole, and wholeness is irresistible. Yet the irony remains. The more she stands apart, the more he leans in. The less she needs, the more he desires to give. The more she holds her ground, the more he feels compelled to rise to her level. This is not a game of manipulation. It is the alchemy of nature. The magnetism of wholeness pulls on the fragments of others. Her very existence whispers to him, "You too can be more than half. You too can stand alone." And that whisper is both terrifying and alluring. For you, listening now, the question is not whether solitude makes you lovable. The question is whether you are willing to love yourself enough to step into it. Are you willing to face the silence where your own voice trembles? Are you willing to stand unaccompanied in a world that tells you a woman without a man is incomplete? Are you willing to choose yourself, even if it means walking away from the very validation you once believed you needed? Because in that choice lies your liberation. It is there you stop negotiating for scraps of attention and begin feasting on the richness of your own becoming. It is there you stop bending to fit a man's comfort and begin standing in the shape of your own truth. And it is there, in the solitude that once terrified you, that you discover the deepest companionship of all, the bond between you and your soul. He will come, perhaps, or perhaps not, but either way, you will not wait, you will not chase, you will not wither in his absence. For the woman who chooses solitude does not choose against men. She chooses for herself. And in choosing for herself, she becomes the rarest of all presences, a woman who is free. And nothing is more magnetic than freedom. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.